for this evening's meeting. Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. And I'm Stephanie Stroud, the Deputy Mayor, in case you hadn't picked that up lately. And I'm taking the place of the Mayor who's given her apologies. I'd like to just acknowledge we have 3 past-serving councillors in the audience tonight, so welcome, as well as a past-serving Mayor. And otherwise I'll get on with the meeting. Thank you. So I declare the Ordinary Council meeting of the 20th of July 2021 held in Council Chambers at the City of Subiaco open at 5:34 p.m. I welcome councillors, staff, the media, members of the gallery. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Wadja Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to the city. Please note this meeting is being recorded. By being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Recordings will be made available on the City's website following the meeting. Confidential sections of council meetings will not be live streamed or recorded. We will proceed with the meeting. Agenda item, attendance, apologies and leave of absence. We have apologies this evening from Mayor Penny Taylor, Councillor Derek Nash, Councillor Jodie Mansfield and Councillor Matt Davis. Are there any other apologies? No, the rest of the team are here. Thank you for your attendance. Leave of absence, we need a mover and seconder for leave of absence for Mayor Penny Taylor to be granted a leave of absence for the period of the 9th of August 2021 to the 27th of September 2021 inclusive. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Mover Councillor McMullen, seconder Councillor Phelan. Thank you. Can we please put this to the vote? I don't think we've got the lights up yet. There we go. Is that everybody? Thank you. That decision is carried unanimously. We also have another request for leave of Another request for leave of absence from Councillor Blake Phelan for the period of 27th of July 2021 to the 27th of August 2021. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor De Vries and Councillor Rowe. Thank you. Put that to the vote. Thank you. That has also been carried unanimously. Disclosures of interest. Do we have any disclosures of interest this evening? No, thank you. Moving on. Do we have response to previous? Do we have a response to previous public questions taken on notice? No, we don't. Thank you. Give me a minute. Public question time. The Acting CEO will now read the conditions of entry of a statement. Thank you, CEO.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and good evening, elected members and members of the gallery. The conditions of entry statement is as follows. In regard to attendance of the public at this meeting, clause 3.11, 2 and 3 of the City of Subiaco Meeting Procedures Local Law 2013 requires that a person addressing the Council must extend the courtesy and respect to the Council and the process under which it operates and shall comply with the direction of the presiding member. The Meeting Procedures Local Law also states A person observing a meeting must not create a disturbance at the meeting by interrupting or interfering in the proceedings, whether by expressing approval or dissent, by conversing or by any other means. I ask that all present abide by the provisions of the Meeting Procedures Local Law and act appropriately. All views on the matters before Council this evening are valid, and I ask that all be shown the courtesy of expressing their views without interruption, be they the views from the public gallery or elected members. Should this meeting be interrupted by members of the public gallery, the meeting may be adjourned and those causing the disturbance may be asked to leave. I remind each person making a statement that you will be limited to 3 minutes, and for those asking questions, you will need to restrict your questions to 2 questions with no preamble. Please ensure your mobile phones are turned off or switched to silent, and you are reminded that there is no recording or photography permitted in this meeting. I thank you in advance for your adherence to procedures for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. We do have a number of questions and statements tonight, and I welcome that. I love to see a full gallery and people speaking up. I do ask you, though, to keep to your time. Now, you're going to get a little warning bell, and rather than stop and have a discussion with you about summing up, I ask you, please, to take note of that warning bell and to sum up with 2 more sentences and then please complete. So, moving on with the first question, we have from Julie Matheson of Coglan Road, Subiaco. Thank you, Julie.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor and councillors and people in the gallery and the media. Thank you for that warm welcome this evening, Deputy Mayor. Thank you. My first question to the Acting CEO is, I'm asking this question in respect to the $150,000 that was spent on new drainage pits and improvements to Churchill Avenue in 2015-16, and the $140,243,000 that was spent on replacement pits and drainage investigations to Hay Street in 2018 and 19. Last week, as reported in the Post, stormwater flooded business premises on Churchill Avenue and Hay Street, Subiaco. Is the Acting CEO satisfied that there was appropriate engineering oversight of ratepayers' funds to the tune of more than $290,000 spent on drainage improvements to these streets, and that the work was carried out to the business and community standards and expectations? That's my first question. My second question is, how much did the council spend on the scheme amendment 34 for lot 141, which is 97 Thomas Street, Subiaco, to change the residential permit to medical use before it was sent to the WA Planning Commission for approval? And would this be a similar amount of money for lot 501 Subiaco Oval, which is heritage listed, currently not zoned for anything? There is no additional uses required, no discretionary uses required. It's not a medical centre, it's not a complex amendment. The Environmental Protection Authority would approve, and the State Heritage Council would also approve. Thank you. I'll listen to the answers.
Thank you, Director of Technical Services.
Thank you, and through you, Deputy Mayor. In relation to question 1, the City did not spend the $150,000 allocation for Churchill Avenue within the 2015-16 budget, as it was very successful in lobbying the Water Corporation to install an underground soakage system there instead. The Water Corporation, at their cost, installed a 750,000 litre soakage structure to supplement the Subiaco main drain within the Churchill Avenue in 2016-17. Similarly, the $80,000 allocation for Hay Street within the 2018-19 budget was not spent due to the works clashing with the proposed two-way conversion and with the Water Corporation water main replacement programme. In both instances, the City has ensured prudent design and spending as part of its drainage improvements programme. Thank you.
And the second question to the Director of Community and Development Services. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Presiding Member. In response to the second question, the cost to prepare Amendment 34 to Town Planning Scheme Number 4 will have rested with the relevant landowner for whom it was prepared. The City will have expended resources in assessing and progressing the amendment. The proposal for an amendment relating to Subiaco Oval is substantially different to Amendment 34, and the two cannot be accurately compared. Under the relevant planning legislation, the proposed scheme amendment at item 11.2 would be considered as a complex amendment. Subiaco Oval is in the Subiaco East redevelopment area, and in the unlikely chance an amendment to the City's local planning scheme is proceeded with by the State, following a Council resolution, it will be of no effect. Thank you.
Mary McFarlane, would you like to approach the rostrum? Thank you.
Thank you. At last month's council meeting, Joanne Beattie, who I understand does not reside in Subiaco and is not a ratepayer, was afforded the privilege by Mayor Taylor of making a public statement. In return, Joanne Beattie seriously breached Subiaco's public statement procedures by not only making a statement that was almost 6 minutes long, which is twice the stipulated length, but making a statement that was markedly different in content to that originally submitted, and even more seriously, denigrating the council and making adverse comments regarding one councillor in particular. Mayor Taylor said in response to a question by Councillor Stroud that evening that she was not aware of the changes to the statement originally submitted by Joanne Beattie, and that a copy of the statement read at the meeting would be provided to council. My first question had been about the whereabouts of the full statement, since it was not showing on the council's website as late as yesterday, but I do know that it is now showing from this afternoon. So my only question now is, has Joanne Beattie been formally advised by the Mayor or Council of the disrespect and discourtesy she has shown to the City of Subiaco by deliberately breaching the City's public statement procedures? If not, why not? Particularly as all ratepayers attending council meetings are consistently reminded by the Mayor and the acting CEO at the start of each meeting of the necessity of following procedures and protocols, showing respect, etc., etc. If a formal approach has been made to Ms Beattie, what are the details, and has a formal apology to council, and in particular to Deputy Mayor Stroud, been received? Thank you.
Through you, Presiding Member. As you've indicated, we have received the statement that was read out, and that has now been loaded up on the website along next to the minutes. In relation to the question that you've asked, the City has advised Ms Beattie of the requirements under the City's public statement procedure and the City's meeting procedure local law.
And I haven't received an apology. Paul Clements from Barker Road, would you like to step up to the rostrum? Thank you.
Am I on? There we go. Thank you. I'd like to ask two questions regarding the elected members' motions that are on tonight. Firstly, the Council has made its position clear via Council resolutions regards to the replacement 1.73 hectares of active playing fields in addition to Subiaco Oval. However, what is missing is the City's public advancement of this position in the broader and local media. No one who I've spoken to has heard of any examples over the last two or 3 years where the city's designated spokespeople have expressed the city's position in this major issue via press release or placement of an advertisement in the print media or conference, or spoken of this major issue in any immediate events in relation to Subiaco East. Given this lack of public examples, would the city refresh our memories how and share where the replacement 1.73 hectares of active playing fields has been advanced in the print media or via media event broadcast on television or radio by the city? If there has been little or no attempts and the city was to commence lobbying, why would it cost $150,000 as outlined in tonight's agenda? The second question, will the city explain if an unelected official used delegated authority to submit comments on Development WA's prepared Subiaco Oval and Railway Precinct Design Guideline rather than this important draft document to go to Council for its consideration within the public domain? If so, why? And is it true that Development WA have been saying no time extensions which would have enabled this process to fit in with ordinary council schedules? Please provide any comments made on our behalf publicly. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Presiding Member. In response to the first question, City communications are consistent with the Council position on Subiaco East, including the preference for 1.73 hectares of active green space. This messaging has been shared across City digital and print communications about the development. To have any likelihood of success at this point in the State's project, any lobbying and advertising campaign would need to be comprehensive, and as such, costs are estimated to be at least $150,000 for a 6-month campaign. If it was decided to proceed, project scoping would then be required, followed by a request for quote or tender process being conducted to ascertain the exact costs. Council has not previously resolved to conduct a media and/or advocacy campaign on this issue. The actions contained in Council resolutions requiring staff to correspond with other agencies has been carried out. In response to your second question, City officers provided a response to the draft Subiaco Oval and Railway Precinct Design Guidelines consistent with Council's resolution on the Subiaco East Master Plan. The City's comment noted the absence of 1.73 hectares of active playing fields and recommended additional playing fields be incorporated in the Subiaco East area. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon Williams of Larrendale Road, City Beach. Would you like to approach the rostrum? Thank you.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor, Councillors and everyone in the chambers tonight. Question 1. On March 23rd, Councillor Rowe raised an excellent amendment to the Development WA referral on Lot 500 and 501 Roberts Road, public realm and landscape works, which was supported by the majority of Council. It reinforced and strongly supported the inclusion of the replacement 1.73 of active open space or playing fields in addition to the shared oval. Will the City please explain why this amendment was not included in the official City communications about these works? Please also clarify if Development WA are still assisting in City communications on Subi East to achieve alignment of communications as per the secret dealings of the Subi East Precinct Liaison Committee. And question 2. Many in the community are concerned that Mueller Park will also be compromised and or built over at some point in time if this redevelopment goes ahead as is. Legitimate public concerns were tested by a Department of Local Government Sport and Cultural Industries Director, Mr McMile, who on October 10, 2018, posed a question on activating Mueller Park for recreational purposes to what was a Chatham House Rules Subi East Precinct Liaison Committee. On reply, Mayor Taylor advised the committee, and I quote, At the recent heritage meeting for the project, Muir Park was given a Category 1 or 2 reserve. Therefore, a lot of protection around this park, so it would be difficult to use this park for active uses in the next 15 or so years. Thus, Muir Park is also under threat and could be repurposed or even sold off like huge chunks of our recreation reserve in 15 years or less. Given this, as the spokesperson of council adopted position, will the Mayor please explain why any time frame would make any difference and why the Mayor didn't take this opportunity to rule out and speak out against any threat to Muir Park's current use? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Presiding Member. In response to the first question, Councillor Rowe's amendment was included in Council's response on the Subiaco East Public Realm and Landscaping Development application sent to Development WA in March 2021. In response to your second question, we will take that question on notice and get a response to you following the meeting. Thank you.
Moving on to public statement time, we have Robin White of Darwin Crescent, Subiaco, and this is to be read by Pat Kershaw. Thank you, Pat.
Is that right now? I'm reading for Dr. Robin White, Deputy Mayor, City of Subiaco councillors and staff members of the gallery. As a long-term Subiaco resident of over 40 years and a retired secondary school principal, I am especially concerned with the most recently released plans relating to the East Subiaco redevelopment Oval Precinct. These proposed plans seem to show no respect for and exclude the needs of the young people that are a part of this area. When the current state government announced it was establishing a new inner city school on the Kitchener Park site, rather than the several appropriate government-owned sites in the city centre, I was surprised. However, I, like many others, assumed the parameters and assumptions underlying the development scheme for East Subiaco Precinct would now recognise the existence of the schools and prioritise the guidelines governing development around the new Bob Hawke College and Perth Modern School. Within a few years, there will be over 3,400 young people aged between 11 and 18 years who will need their safety, security, well-being and privacy reflected and respected in any redevelopment scheme. Some aspects that should be considered. Bob Hawke College demands a sizable open space for its daily educational curricula. These activities are not compatible with the Oval being used as a community resource at all times of the day for exercising dogs, small children activity, casual walking, practicing golf shots, jogging and exercising by the general community. It is almost inevitable that without alternative open spaces and playing fields, protective fencing around the school oval will be required. This was the prime factor in the construction of a security fence erected around Perth Modern School. In the minds of long-term Subiaco residents, that missing 1.73 hectares needs to be found in addition to the school oval. The location of Bob Hawke Secondary College leads to a further challenge to the original intent of the Subiaco East redevelopment planners. While attending a school, students and staff and their community expect security, safety and privacy to be paramount. In many government and non-government schools across the city, fences and security cameras have been installed. This decision is not about delineating the boundaries of each school. The fences and technology have been installed for the safety of young people protected from the surveillance and interference by unknown adults. The current planning for the areas adjacent to and overlooking the school oval continue to suggest residential towers and a number of business opportunities absolutely unsuitable for school precincts. Last two sentences, I'm jumping to the end. The safety, security and privacy of the young people must be paramount. Innovative planners should be able to create an excellent safe school precinct respectful of the needs of these young people while allowing intense residential development in appropriate spaces and away from those used by school children. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mummery. Malcolm Mummery, would you like to approach? Thank you, from Cartley Road.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I address my comments to the closing sentences of the officer's response to item 11.4, namely, and I quote, "The state government has just been re-elected and has made clear what they intend to focus on. There is no incentive for the government to change its decision on this subject," end quote. In summary, there are now 13 new members on government benches. That includes Dr. Katrina Stranton, MLA, member for the electorate Subiaco is in. Not only does Subiaco now have that voice representing it in government, but there are also other voices and other reasons why it should reconsider its decision. The most pressing reason is that the decision it made was likely based on invalid information. The Premier and Development WA Chair, Mr McCulloch, with whom a meeting is sought by the motion, came to the position the government now holds based on advice from a hierarchy of advisors. Whether or not the advice they received faithfully reflected the view of the people of Subiaco, or was cognizant of the conventions of previous governments dealing with open space reserves, has been shown by subsequent reporting to be clearly suspect. Given the social impact of surrendering open space for sport in an area designated for high-density dwelling development, the incentive of avoiding an error that would negatively impact future generations of Subiaco's youth is more than enough reason for reconsideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie Matheson of Coglan Road. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor and Councillors. Julie Matheson from Ruby Hutchinson House, Coglan Road, Subiaco. It would be perfect to kick off the campaign with this newly elected government to preserve what's left of the reserve by initiating a scheme amendment on the State Heritage listed Lot 501 Subiaco Oval as parks and recreation. This scheme amendment is part of an overall campaign to ask the state government to turn its mind to the active sports space that it's required for the additional population in the western suburbs, including Subiaco, Shenton Park, Dagley, Jollymont, Leederville and West Perth. The campaign includes a proposed scheme amendment, an amendment to the Memorandum of Understanding, an advertising campaign, another letter and more meetings with the Premier, including new Minister Tony Booty, Mr David Caddy and Development WA. I have read the officer's comment and I'm not persuaded that this council cannot initiate a scheme amendment. The officer's comment mentions 3 obstacles. Subiaco Redevelopment Scheme number 2 overrides LPS 5 for development applications. Agreed, but LPS 5 is referred 13 times in Development WA's local development plan for 113 Salvato Road, and therefore LPS 5 will be considered by developers before they purchase the reserve for a few dollars. The WA Planning Commission may not recommend approval of the scheme amendment. Well, this is pure speculation. Mr Caddy may say yes and convince the Minister. The Minister for Planning may amend the local planning scheme while under the control of Development WA. Yes, possible, but it shouldn't be a deterrent. If you wait to do a scheme amendment on Lot 501 and Mueller Park until it's been normalised back to Subiaco Council, you bring into play the developer's compensation and the Estate Administrative Tribunal, but this has not been mentioned in the officer's comment. The Shire of Mundaring and Paige McNeil, Chair of Save Perth Hills, submitted a scheme amendment to the Town Planning Commission, the WA Planning Commission, to rezone North Stoneville to rural. Both faced strong opposition from the landowner, which is the Anglican Diocese, and the Satterley Group that took to the airways. These efforts resulted in the WAPC refusing the North Stoneville structure plan and the Satterley Group appealing the decision. Page McNeill and the Shire of Mundaring are still waiting for the scheme amendment to be approved some 12 months later, but nothing stopped them from trying. If your moves tonight are outrightly rejected in all cases, at least you tried. Compensation for reserve land that was purchased from the state government for a few dollars against the wishes of the petitioners from 1903, when former Mayor of Subiaco and first Labor Premier Henry Daglish was in power. Thank you very much for the extension of time.
Thank you. We now have a prior Mayor, Tony Costa. Welcome to the rostrum, Tony.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor and fellow former councillors, fellow councillors. My statement today, as a long-time Subiaco resident, ratepayer, councillor 1983 to 1994, and then the People's Mayor 1994 to 2005. I would never let Subiaco's culture and social history be sold off and destroyed at the Municipal Subiaco Oval Reserve. The entire Subiaco Oval Reserve is state heritage listed, not just an oval patch of grass with goal posts. The very idea that parts of Subiaco's heritage at the reserve will be carved up for high-rise blocks of flats and commercial buildings is appalling and unwanted. The officer's comment from your administration to Councillor Blake Phelan's elected member's motion conveniently withholds this information to potentially confuse the public and mislead them. This council must do everything in its power to stop the carve-up of the heritage-listed reserve at Lot 501. This council has the power to initiate a scheme amendment to the LPS 5 scheme map, seek an amendment to the MOU with Minister for Lands, Mr. Tony Butty, who is new to the portfolio and must have more common decency to listen to the people of this area and publish adverts in the Post newspaper to help change the minds of the government agencies that are involved with the proposed appalling carve-up of our Subiaco Municipal Reserve at Lot 501. I accordingly commend Councillor Blake Phelan's elected member's motion to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. We now have a statement from Mary McFarlane of Francis Street. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I've just seen the EMM at 11.1 additional parking permits for King Edward, Mayor Taylor's second EMM in as many council meetings to advance what she obviously believes should be the provision of additional parking permits based on her perception of community feedback. I wish Mayor Taylor would advocate just as strongly for the 1.73 hectares of sports space which has been stolen from us by the state government and Development WA. I am sure she supports either or both of the EMMs this evening, which seek to raise the sports space and zoning issues at the highest level and not take no for an answer. I am sure Mayor Taylor will do her utmost to publicise the injustice and unfairness of what the state government and DWA are inflicting on the children and ratepayers of the city of Subiaco. This, sadly, is not the first time I have stood here and pleaded with the mayors and councillors to stand up strongly for the planning disaster that is unfolding at Subi East. I made 2 public statements in early 2020 to try and have a council representative attend the Subi East Community Reference Group. Both times this plea was rejected, partly on the basis that the Mayor and the then CEO were on the Subi East Precinct Liaison Committee and would continuously advocate for the Council's position in relation to Subi East. The spectacular failure of their advocacy has allowed precious months to pass without strong public lobbying of the Premier, State Government and DWA. The MOU signed by Mayor Taylor does not provide for regular reviews or even a dispute resolution process. The MOU should have reflected cooperation and collaboration between the parties, but instead this document is unduly harsh and extremely unfair to the city of Subiaco. I fail to understand the officer comment that seeking to correct the MOU could have implications for the principles in this document. My reading of the situation is that the city is currently in the worst position possible and has nothing whatsoever to lose by lobbying the relevant authorities. The push to have Lot 501 reclassified to public open space should be unanimously supported. We need to explore every avenue to claw back the sports space that has been taken from us. I note the officer comment that the cost of this public advertising and lobbying campaign could be around $150,000 for a 6-month campaign, which has not been budgeted for. This amount is loose change when we consider what is at stake here. Additionally, I would estimate that the legal fees, private investigator fees and council time staff time incurred by some members of council since early 2018 to lodge spurious complaints against fellow councillors, almost all of which were dismissed, would easily exceed the $150,000, which is an amount that should be repaid by the Mayor. I urge all councillors to vote for Councillor Phelan and/or Councillor McMullen's EMMs. We need to take immediate action to raise these key matters in the public arena. We may well lose, but we should not give up without doing everything in our power to correct the injustices inflicted on Subiaco. Thank you.
Andrew Purser of Juniper Bank Way. Thank you, Andrew.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor and Councillors. In my 40 years of being in Subiaco, this is the first time I felt the need to come and make a statement, and it reads as follows. When I first moved to Subiaco over 40 years ago, the Subiaco East Sports Reserve incorporated an oval, or an English-style common, where the Subiaco train station is now located. Further east were tennis courts, and across the road was the heritage-listed Subiaco Oval, where I played a grand final in 1979, without the high fences and lock gates used for multiple purposes. Further east on Kitchener Park, the Subiaco Bowling Club was located, and all these facilities were actively used by residents and general community all year round. I've recently learned this wonderful Class A reserve and sports precinct was brought about in 1903 by the foresight of the humble Subiaco ratepayers as they describe themselves, lodging a petition with the state government and then Premier Henry Daglish, a former mayor of Subiaco. I quote their statement. This petition is to establish a Class A reserve for the health and recreation of the people forever and provide a priceless boon in the future to the large population settling around the area. What wonderful hindsight, or foresight, sorry. In the late 1990s, as president of the Subiaco Junior Football Club, I attended the annual winter ground allocation meeting here at the council chambers to negotiate, or more particularly horse trade, access to the sports grounds at Rosalie Oval, the only sports grounds in the city. All the junior sports clubs using Rosalie Oval competed for very limited space. Even then, over 20 years ago, there was a severe shortage of sports ovals at Rosalie Oval to accommodate all the winter sports clubs using the oval. This, I understand, is still the case today. In recent times, I was pleased to hear the AFL would be relocated to Burswood and the Subiaco grandstand demolished and active green sports space established for the new Bob Hawke College and the community. How wrong we were to think the previous 1903 sports precinct would be re-established. What has transpired with the state government's MetroNet obsession with high-rise buildings which will invade the oval and building of the school's hard courts, we now effectively only have half a football oval that can be used for football games, as any footballs kicked through the eastern goals near the school end up in the Bob Hawke College hard court area. How, on our watch, have we now ended up with only half a useful football oval, which was once a magnificent sports precinct established by our forebears? I strongly commend Councillor Blake's Phelan's electus member's motion to you. Thank you.
Paul Clements of Barker Road, Subiaco.
Thank you. Thank you once again. Mayor and Councillors, I refer to the two elected members' motions on tonight's agenda. I fully support the thrust of both motions and Council's judgment to adopt either or a combination thereof. Excuse me. I was raised with the idea that the Labor Party make decisions for the people, for the amenity, for the future, without emphasis on profit or bottom line. Consequently, this matter that is referred to should be taken to the Premier with a distinct message that the amenity of the 100-year-old reserve is being severely compromised and or destroyed, just at the stage of the city's development when that amenity is needed more than ever. It is needed forever and the need will only get greater. The population has current day health issues such as diabetes, obesity, mental health and crime issues, and COVID. Active open space is a direct antidote to these modern community issues. The proposed plan comprises development of commercial and residential property for sale. This has never happened to reserve land in the history of Western Australia without the agreement of the local authority. It should never happen. The need for active open space has been established beyond any doubt. There is a shortage of playing fields, waiting lists for places in sports teams. Professional reports have established this beyond any doubt. The government policies on these exact requirements have been ignored. Families have to travel many kilometres to get into teams, forcing those local residents to travel further, which is an established pattern. More advanced cities have made the same mistake. This is even articulated in the folklore. The songs, "Where Have All the Flowers Gone?", "Tar and Cement." It's all been done before. Why do we have to make that same mistake? Sydney and Melbourne have set up bodies to try and resolve the problems and are finding the cost to rectify is massive and in some cases impossible. We don't have to make the same costly mistakes. Baby boomers, often accused of taking too much and not giving back and providing for the future. If this plan proceeds, that will be a classic case. Thank you.
Phil Marshall from Roberts Road. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Councillors. My representations here today take the perspective of a parent in the school community, and schools form a significant part of the local community. The safety and well-being of students, our children, and school staff is paramount. Decisions relating to Subi East redevelopment need to be made with this as a clear criterion, and to date I feel this has not been given fair or just weighting in the plans presented. School ovals should be separate from public open space. Preventing the local community to access scarce playing fields and green space during school time without good alternatives can cause resentment, where the goal should be harmony as part of the community. Where these are not separate, the lack of clear boundaries exacerbates the issues and can cause unsafe situations for students and staff by having intruders declared on site, which can trigger a school to go into lockdown, a traumatic event for many. The planned high-rise buildings adjacent to school buildings and school ovals is another poor outcome for the well-being of our students and staff, as it presents serious privacy issues as a continuous, permanent invasion into our learning environments. This will affect both Perth Modern School and our compatriots at Bob Hawke College in the plans presented to date. Buffer space around schools is necessary to provide a safe environment for our students and staff. I consider myself progressive. I am not against infill or high density, but it must be done with the right supporting infrastructure. Many thousands more people living in an area should mean more public open space and more playing fields for the local community, not less. There is a separate important conversation about pedestrian safety by putting more people and cars on already congested roads in the vicinity of our schools, which is the current focus of our P&C. The plans presented to date do not meet our expectations or the standard of living that the people in our local community deserve. With each subsequent iteration of plans, new issues have emerged and existing issues remain unaddressed. The WA Planning Commission Draft Operational Policy 2.4 Planning for School Sites states common boundaries of school sites with residential uses should be avoided wherever possible, and land uses such as service stations, restricted premises, licensed premises such as taverns, small bars and liquor stores, consulting rooms and industrial uses are considered undesirable next to school sites and have real and perceived impacts on health, amenity and safety. The Subi East design guidelines clearly do not adhere with this WAPC policy, both in terms of proximity and land use. Thank you. Part of the way forward must be to preserve and even extend public open space, including formal playing fields for the local community, ideally providing separate spaces for school ovals. Additionally, the master plan and design guidelines must be revised to adhere to WAPC policy outlined above. Decisions made today will impact the local community for generations. We trust that the council will stand tall and fulfil its responsibility to represent the interests of the local community. Thank you for your time.
Yes, sure.
We received a statement from Miss Sharon Williams, former resident. She was denied the opportunity to speak. I'm requesting if she could, if she's willing and prepared, she could say her statement.
Thank you, Councillor Fallon. Yes, unfortunately, according to our meeting procedures, local law, people who are not residents or ratepayers of the city cannot present statements. However, it is a decision that can be made by the presiding member, and I just want to acknowledge that Ms Williams has put an enormous amount of time into the Subi East Community Action Group, and on that basis I would like to welcome her to the rostrum. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Councillors. I'm just overawed by tonight. I can't believe we've got so many great people in the room, and just what I'm hearing is just wonderful. So I'll start, but I am just overawed a bit as well. So good evening, everyone. I am a current volunteer within Subi East and a member of the Subi East Community Reference Group, former resident and passionate mum of two kids who are proud graduates of schools in Subiaco. I am surprised by the staff comments on the two EMs before you tonight. Clearly the city has received zero compensation in giving up the 1.73 hectares of Kitchener Park and management rights to the city's over 100-year-old recreational reserve. The inference that there are significant implications that will be detrimental to achieving the principles of the non-binding part of the MOU hold little weight. Since the binding parts of the MOU were signed over, the government has repeatedly demonstrated it is not prepared to listen, and many interest groups have been largely ignored. The state government got what they wanted, not even at a bargain basement price, they got it for free. No replacement 1.73 in addition to the oval, no contributions towards a two-way conversion of Hay and Roberts, no dollar contributions or land for a rec centre, and school hard courts built on the city's designated space against this council's wishes. Perhaps the city should send invoices for $50 million to the government, because that is what the 1.73 and 0.6 hectares of reserve is worth using the minister's own sales figures. As to reputational damage, the risk lies with the state government in continuing to ignore the wishes of this council and its communities. What is sorely missing is firm and loud public action from council to support people's health. Subi East is failing to deliver minimum active playing fields for denser infill. Given the shared use of the oval, the shortfall of playing fields for more than 6,000 future Subi East residents is likely to be 75% or greater. Who will tell the kids, sorry, there's no space for you to play sport, we're full? Past residents and councillors, including WA's first Labor Premier Henry Dalglish, fought hard to preserve their reserve forever for the people's health in 1904. More recently, former Mayor Heather Henderson advocated strongly for the replacement 1.73, which was a requirement of the council she led. Why wouldn't this council be prepared to do everything it can today to keep the People's Reserve entrusted to this city? It is priceless and should never be for sale, especially in an increasingly densified city which will double in population. There are too many controversial firsts in the plans for Subi East that have been neither consulted nor agreed with stakeholders, and many of these are the things that we've heard tonight, like skyscrapers on the edge of school areas, undesirable land uses, proposals which are in direct contrast to education ministers whose recent statements condemned surveillance of students and residents from adjacent sites. All these WA firsts can be avoided. They are totally unnecessary. On behalf of our kids and the generations to follow, I urge you to take each and every action you can to say stop and amend your plans to reflect what council and its communities have been clearly advocating for since 2017. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that ends tonight, the questions and statements. Thank you. And thank you everybody for their tremendous contribution tonight. Moving on to agenda item 7, we have petitions and approved deputations, and I believe we have a petition from Councillor Hammersley. Will you read out the petition as well? Thank you, Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, I've been asked to present this petition on behalf of the community, and I'll just read it out for everyone. Petition regarding the laneway between Duke Street and Nicholson Road, located adjacent to lots 385 to 405 Rockerby Road, Subiaco. To the councillors of the City of Subiaco, we, the undersigned, respectfully request that the elected members of the City of Subiaco support the retention of vehicle access in this lane as currently exists, the retention of the Western Power transformer in its current location, and further, we ask that the City's Planning Department take the necessary steps to ensure that any future beautification of the laneway by the City or third parties does not in any way impede on that vehicular access to the lane and adjacent laneway network. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other petitions this evening? Thank you. Moving on to confirmation of minutes of previous meetings. Can we please have a mover and a seconder for 8.1 ordinary council meetings of the 22nd of June? Councillor Jennings, thank you. Councillor Rowe. I'll put that to the vote, thank you. Thank you, that's been carried unanimously. Moving on to the next item, announcements by the presiding member. I appreciate where everybody's headspace is tonight. That's in mostly really Subi East. But I want to share with you where I've spent a good part of the day, and that's in the management of our waste. I've been down to the to East Rockingham to visit the waste to energy plant that is being built down there, because I am on the Western Metropolitan Regional Council. This is really an exciting development for Perth, for WA. It will treat our residual waste. This is our red bin waste. This is the waste that doesn't go to FOGO and it can't be recycled. It's the waste that otherwise would go to landfill. So you can imagine how important that is. It's European based, it's amazing technology. It's still very much being built. What I saw was a massive amount of concrete. And that was what I saw, never alone what is underground. It is, there are about 400 odd of these facilities all through Europe. One is very close to the Eiffel Tower. Another one is very close to the palace of the Danish King and Queen in Copenhagen. There's another one in London. And it's really very exciting that we have one being built down in East Rockingham. The idea is that the facility will achieve a landfill diversion rate of 95.8%, well beyond the state government target of 85%. It also, because it's waste to energy, it will produce intermittent green electrical power, and it will be enough power to fuel 36,000 homes. The project will provide 50 full-time jobs, and strategically it's actually very important to the City of Subiaco and to all the member councils of the Western Metropolitan Regional Council. It will specially insulate the City of Subiaco and the member councils of WMRC against the rise in the rate levy, which will come very soon from the government. It has a 30-year life, and then it's all packed up, or taken down, and the whole site is clear and be able to use for other purposes. So it was a pretty exciting morning, and I just wanted to share that with you to see for myself. Amazing amount of enterprise and intellect and innovation. The second announcement I would like to make to you is very much in your headspace tonight, and that's about, I asked the city, originally I proposed as elected members motion, apparently wasn't required, to release the MOUs of the 2017 October meeting and the MOU of the 2018 January 30th 2018 meeting. I thought it was very important that these MOUs were on the public record, because they have created some confusion amongst people about what was in them and what isn't. So I recommend that you go to the website. As you'll find out, the 2017 meeting did have the 1.73 hectares in the MOU, and it was taken. The 1.73 hectares was taken out. Those words in the MOU of 2018. That MOU was what was signed by Mayor Taylor and CEO Don Burnett. So thank you for your time, for listening on that, and we will move on.
Before we get on with the agenda, I'd like to withdraw 11.2, my elected member's motion, from the agenda, please.
Excuse me, Councillor Flynn, would you like to turn your speaker system on? Okay, thank you, Councillor Phelan. That will be accepted. Do you realise that in the minutes it will present as a lapsed motion? I'm sorry. No, it isn't. It will present. It's still because it is an agenda item. That's the way it's handled, and it becomes a lapsed.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Should it be presented as lapsed? Does that mean that it can't be put up again in the next meeting or the meeting after?
I believe it's for 3 months. Is that correct? Yeah. I thought you might. Okay, thank you. We have now to consider the possible en bloc resolution. I'll just wait. Has all the councillors got them in front of you? Do you want to withdraw any of these en bloc items? No. So therefore, can we have a mover and seconder? And the items that will be passed on en bloc are AR2, AR3, D1, D2, D3, D4, C1, C2, C3, C4, C5 and C6. Mover, Councillor Hammersley and Councillor De Vries, thank you. We'll now vote on that item. Thank you. Thank you. That's been carried unanimously. Okay, thank you, councillors. That now takes us to our annual report and audited annual financial statements, AR1. And we do need a absolute majority to move this. Thank you. So that means we need 7 out of the 8 of us tonight. Councillor Hammersley, you're happy to move this item? Thank you. Who would second this item, please? Was that a hand up, Councillor McMullen? Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Councillor Hammersley, would you like to speak to the item?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. So the date for the long-delayed audit committee meeting held on Monday, 12 July 2021, was notified to me by administration on 3 March 2021. That's a long time ago. It was also consistently mentioned in our electors' members' information bulletin that we get each week from 14th of May 2021. So imagine my surprise when just before I left my home to attend the meeting, I received a telephone call from the administration to check that I was coming and asking me whether I would agree to preside at the meeting. I asked and was told that the other 2 elected members on the committee had given their apologies. Councillor Davis that morning and Mayor Taylor about 40 minutes prior to the meeting. I too had a quite unimportant reason to give an apology in favour of using my somewhat expensive seats at the West Coast Eagles game that evening. But given the importance of the meeting, I would not and I did not give my apologies. I gave my tickets away to a friend. Given the weather and the outcome of that game, I'm glad I didn't go for those reasons alone. Anyway, thanks to Aswin Kumar, who attended as the committee's external community member and enabled a quorum to be formed. The Deputy Auditor General and his colleague who manages Subiaco's audit on behalf of the Auditor General of the state, as well as a partner and manager from KPMG who conduct the audit for the Auditor General, were in attendance to give presentations to the Audit Committee about the audit for the 2019-2020 accounts and the audit plan for 2020-2021. It was a very important meeting, and I regret and in some ways resent that only one elected member was in attendance to consider and question the issues. Having said that, the meeting went well, and Mr. Kumar made a solid contribution, it being clear that he had read the papers very carefully and turned his minds to the issues. One of the things that is apparent from what I have heard during that meeting is the additional layers of cost that are being imposed on local governments, including due to the reporting requirements of ever-changing accounting standards, some of which one might reasonably think are a bit over the top for local government given their compliance requirements. It may be that in due course our administration might invite the Council to consider whether the costs of compliance is worth the effort to get an entirely unconditional audit letter. I have in mind in particular the cost and work involved in recording fair values for all assets every year, when local government regulations require revaluation at least every 5 years. According to the new Minister for Local Government, we are not at risk of forced amalgamations, and our borrowing capacity is against rates revenue, not asset values. So we are not like a public company at risk of takeover and with people considering whether to invest in our shares. One might ask the question, is this all a bit over the top? Maybe not, but surely worth thinking about. In respect to the location of the holding of the very long delayed 2020 annual electors meeting, after initially proposing the Palms, the staff recommendation moved to be in the council chambers. It was explained that there would be little difference in total numbers and that the live streaming capacity in the chamber should be available and would add to and if it is, would add to the capacity for community members to view the meeting if they wished. Given all the considerations and information provided to us by the staff, both myself and Mr. Kumar were supportive of the proposal to locate the meeting in this chamber, or at least in this building. So that's just a small comment on what's happened at the meeting. Can I just finish off? As the only elected member there, I did want to bring this to your attention and hope that you have taken the time to consider the reports. My own view is that things are on track and that good work is being done. So I do commend the motion tonight to you, and that's it. Thank you.
And thank you for your work on that. Councillor Jennings? No? Okay. Would anybody else like to speak to the report? Sure. Sure. The CEO would like to speak to the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for not only your attendance, of course, but your comments. I would just like to place on record my appreciation to the Director Hawkins, and the Manager of Financial Services for undergoing a torrid time dealing with the auditors for at least the last 6 months on some of the topics that you raised, but there were a couple of others. I would have been excused if either one of the two officers would have throttled the auditor, and I think it would have been justified. But just think that should go on the record. Not about the throttling, but the appreciation.
Yeah, it involved an enormous amount of, a whole nother layer of workload. Thank you. Anybody else like to speak to this? Any questions? Then let's move the item. Thank you. We're putting to the vote. Just a reminder, we need an absolute majority. Thank you. And we've got it. Thank you. So far doing really well. Another unanimous decision. Okay, that brings us up to a giant leap up to our elected members' motions, the time you've all come to listen to. Firstly, I'd just like to point out that 11.1, the King Edward Memorial Hospital additional parking permits, was withdrawn by the Mayor. The next item is 11.2, Preserve the Reserve, submitted by Councillor Phelan. Councillor, are you moving this item?
Yes, I should that lapsed or been...
Through you, presiding member, as the same thing as that the motion was on the agenda, it will be recorded as lapsed in accordance with 2.56 of the Meeting Procedures Local Law. So, and in relation to yours under 2.56, if the motion's moved, as long as you move it, then that provision won't apply.
Thank you, Councillor Phelan. Do we have a seconder for this item? Councillor Rowe. Okay, thank you. Would you like to speak to the item, Councillor Phelan?
Yes, I would. Almost didn't move it. I was concerned there wasn't going to be a seconder, so thanks, Councillor Rowe, for seconding it. I'd like to speak to this motion firstly by thanking the following people who have been working to preserve Subiaco Reserve over the past 12 months. Former mayors Richard Diggins and Tony Costa, former councillors Paul Clements, Julie Matheson and Hugh Richardson, former residents Ross Carson and Sharon Williams, and residents Mary McFarlane, Peter McDonald, Andrew Purser and the editor of the Post newspaper. Lot 501, Subiaco Oval, Mueller Park, 133 Salvato Road, and other sites came under the MRA control in 2017. In 2019, the City of Subiaco rezoned 133 Salvato Road and several other sites during LPS 5, of which all were approved, except Lot 501 Subiaco Oval and Mueller Park, which remains unzoned according to the scheme map on page 48 of the agenda and on the City of Subiaco's website. It's not coded RAC 0 as suggested in the officer's comments. It remains unzoned and vulnerable. What I am seeking to do is resubmit our original request, which was unanimously supported by Council at the 18th of June 2019 OCM, to zone the land Lot 501 as Parks and Recreation to protect the site from being carved up in development lots. I am fully aware that the MOU cannot be amended in the absence of the state government's agreement. What I'm proposing to do is send the corrected MOU for their agreement. I disagree with the officer's comment that seeking an amendment to the MOU will result in significant implications. An MOU itself is not legally binding, so really any of it doesn't need to be followed. Correcting of the MOU to add the 1.73 hectares is just another tool in the campaign to preserve the reserve. Let's be bold and try something different other than just sending another letter and requesting another meeting. Subiaco Council cannot be paralysed trying to predict the outcome of the scheme amendment once it lands at the WAPC. We have to trust in the process that a scheme amendment will fulfil our obligations to our residents and the petitioners from 1903, of which a copy was sent to all councillors by former councillor Julie Matheson. It's not that difficult or costly to prepare a scheme amendment for one lot. Councillors have approved scheme amendments in the past, and this amendment is not offensive to anyone, especially residents and ratepayers who want more density in the appropriate areas. Subiaco Oval is not an appropriate area. The officer's comment mentions that a 6-month lobbying campaign might cost $150,000, which is easily budgeted for in the 21-22 budget, which has $233,111 set aside for Subi East, $55,990 for LPS 5 and strategy, and $947,940 aside for communications and engagement in corporate overheads. The officer's comment equally applies to Mueller Park, which faces the same development threats, but they are just not as obvious as the ones facing our state heritage listed Lot 501 Subiaco Oval, which is 61,131 metres squared and not just an oval patch of grass. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Look, I thought that today we've got people in the gallery who deserve to have this heard. So I thought I would put it on the plate. I think it would be a shame for, doesn't matter what the background comments are, for it not to be dealt with. I noticed tonight that there was a lot of people talking about as they begin their speech, talking about their history. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my history leading up to 16 and a half years on this council. My family also resided in Subiaco, in West Subiaco it was called, back in the between the wars. My uncle Roy hopped on to Sydney after going to the Roselink Primary School. I've resided here in the 70s, been a community pharmacist here for 42 years. And I've had a lot to do with the East Ward. Obviously, I was glad to be nominated to go on the Development WA committee. Everyone has to realise, of course, that as a limitation, you can't just brainstorm it and start turning over what's in front of you. When you go to a meeting, you're given an agenda and you have to deal with the agenda that's in front of you. What worried me right from the start of what we are dealing with is how some of the plans did change, and Councillor Clements has pointed that out. I was talking today with Deputy Mayor on the way back from the farm after being blitzed up there for a few days in the rain and the cold, and it is correct that some of the plans that we saw earlier had playing fields north of stage 1 of the school and other areas, and yet what got me when we dealt with the landscaping recently is those areas were deleted, obviously, stage 2 of the school. The footprint we were hoping would be not anything like what we see today. The first meeting I had with Development WA, I don't mind telling you, there were 3 of us, including a former councillor and an architect who supported me to try and get stage 2 put on top of stage 1. And that had to be done early before you started building because the footings had to be changed. And we saw an opportunity, and that was supported by Councillor White from the old days. And that way we could have preserved those playing fields north of stage 1. That wasn't to be. The other thing that worried me right from the start was how Mooloo Park and Market Square were included in the area of consideration, and I couldn't see why. Now, what we've seen happen since, after we turned down a ridiculous offer to spend half of the city's assets virtually on doing the Smurf, I mean, just a ridiculous situation with no ownership of anything and being dictated to by a couple of entities, including the Department of Education. And I'm sorry, but I couldn't go anywhere near that, as much as I would have liked to have seen another facility and a presence of the city in the East Ward. That's why I wanted to get involved in Development WA, because I've got a strong interest in the East Ward, as we all do. And so that disappeared, and what we're seeing now is an encroachment onto the Subiaco Oval surrounds. Now, the community consultation involved the Bob Hawke School being on Kitchener Park, and we succumbed to that. It didn't involve encroaching on the surrounds of Subiaco Oval, so I do agree. Now, I had a bit of a long-term leave last year when I was away overseas and got caught up. I couldn't get back to Australia for a while when the COVID hit. When I got back, the community consultation had moved a lot of the height and density around the Oval, apparently after community consultation, to this western side. The area that I gather we're concerned about today that could add to the 1.73. So what worries me is we should have been making these noises back then, not now. It's so late. And that's what I've been saying to some of those that wanted me to support it. And I have supported it at the meetings, but you can't talk outside the agenda. You have to talk to the agenda. So when you're sitting on these committee meetings. But I don't see any shame in this. Thank you. Is that right? If anything, it sends a message. I mean, if point one can't be done because the Planning Commission will get in our face, well, so be it. So be it. Let them that you can't do this. But if the community wants us to consider that, I think we should support it and we should give it a go. So I know there was very little effort to be supporting this, but I think we should do it. If anything, it makes a statement. The amount of money that it's been said that will be spent may not happen because it might become just academic and we have to back off. Now, I'll talk to my other resolution later, I suppose. It's not appropriate I talk to it now, but it is a corollary to this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have anyone else who'd like to speak for or against this item? Thank you, Councillor Jennings.
Well, my position is that I prefer, even though it's foreshadowing that, Councillor McMullen's amendment. I think that the things that are proposed in the motion that's before us now, those things can be done, I guess, after we, have another attempt at thrashing something out with the relevant politicians. I think that, we've had every indication that from the government that they're not going to listen to us. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but I think the die is cast in that regard. But I think, we have another go. Doing a scheme amendment, and it's not going to be, it's going to take up resources, staff time, money. Similarly, with the Memorandum of Understanding, I imagine there'll be legal costs and all sorts of things going on in there. So I think that's, whilst it's obviously envisages putting some kind of pressure on the government, I don't know that will be effective or that it really will have that effect. And I think that that's sort of putting the cart before the horse, the two things that are suggested. And I think that it would be better to try and have a face-to-face sort of negotiation with the Premier, if he'll meet with us, though we've been rebuffed before by the politicians. And, I I think it's interesting. The community is thinking that the council and the city can bring to bear the kind of pressure that is actually probably required to change the government's mind, and I personally don't think that is the case, because they've already indicated that they're not the least bit interested in listening to us, and at every step along the way they've rejected what we've said or patted us on the head and said, you know, thank you for your comment and we'll do it our way. So, but nevertheless, as I said, I think we should still try and do something as a final attempt. It is very late to be doing these things. You know, perhaps it is something that should have been attempted much earlier. Unfortunately, you know, due to the dynamics in Subiaco, that probably wasn't going to come off. You know, and I don't need to advert any more to that, because I think everyone would know what I'm talking about. So it's been a very difficult situation for the city and the council, I think, in terms of trying to advocate for what is in the best interest of Subiaco, which I do agree with all the speakers tonight, that, you know, we need this space. It's essential for the future. I think the government's being very short-sighted in not, you know, planning for that, and in cramming in so many people and so many facilities. The school going there, whilst it's a good thing for the community, it has thrown, you know, a whole lot of things out of whack in terms of what the reserve and what the area around there can be used for. And I guess so. I'm already indicated I'm going to go for the Councillor McMullen's motion, so I'll be voting against this. But it's not to say that this second lot of specific actions can't be taken once we've, you know, approached it in the way that, you know, going directly to trying to go to the Premier and Development WA. So that's my position. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hammersley.
Before I speak, can I ask a question? I'm just wondering, under our local law 7.1A, if it was put that the meeting proceed to the next business, would that leave Councillor Phelan's matter intact and protected from the 3-month rule?
Thank you, Director.
Through you, Presiding Member, yes it would. However, 2.5 clause 6 no longer applies, because the motion has been moved and seconded.
So therefore it doesn't suffer the 3-month period, so it does, even if it's voted down, it can be raised again from the ashes. Yes. Would you like to proceed and speak to this? Yes, sure. Sure.
I haven't included a time frame of when we send the scheme amendment in the EMM. Would it be possible to put a time frame in that we send it after, should Mr McMullen's EMM get up, we could potentially send this after we send his letter? Is that doable?
I'm sorry, I'd have to get on top of this elected member's motion of yours, because I'm not sure we're acting out. From my understanding, we're acting out on preparing a scheme amendment and the MOU. So what point were you? I think it's wiser if you just leave it on the table, and then we will deal with it accordingly. Yeah.
There was comments about maybe doing this after David's. I'm just stating that we probably send it after.
Unless a councillor would like to explain that further, my understanding is that should the Premier entertain our views and reconsider, then there would probably be a proceed with scheme amendments or whatever was required to achieve that. Am I right in that assumption? Yeah. Okay. So do you understand that better now?
But if this was to have to wait 3 months to do another scheme amendment? No. Okay.
Yes, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Are you sure about that? Because we used to not be, if something was lost, we never used to be able to bring it back for a certain period of time. Are we definite about that? There's no, I don't see why both these things can't happen simultaneously.
Who went? Yeah. I think the director's pretty sure and the CEO's looking it up.
Through you, presiding member, the proposition that Councillor Hammersley proposed, which is that if there is a procedural motion moved to just move on to the next item of business, means that there's actually been no vote on this item. You just move on, and no, I'm coming around to it. So that was one part of it. The other part is clause 2.5 in relation to elected members' motion. Clause 6 says a motion of which a notice has been given is to lapse unless, and I'll just abbreviate this, the member who gave the notice moves the motion when called on, okay, which has occurred. Then what it says under point 7, which is the provision within our meeting procedures local law about the 3 months, if a notice of motion is given and lapses under clause 6, okay, which means that it hasn't been moved by the person that's put the notice on the motion on the papers, then the notice of motion in the same form or the same effect is not to be given again for at least 3 months. That's what the provisions under 2.5 say. So the motion has been moved, it's been seconded, so therefore no longer does clause 6 under 2.5 apply, and therefore clause 7 also can't apply because clause 6 can't. Councils may have different meeting procedures.
Thank you. Councillor Hammersley.
Yes. I fully agree with all the things that I've heard from the gallery tonight in terms of what are we doing as a society to take a reserve that our forebears did have the foresight to put aside forever. I'm in a very conflicted position because really what this is about is the order of doing things and also the cost and time involved in doing it. And we've got to balance those things up. In particular, I am very conscious of how busy and taxed our planning department is because of the amount of activity that is going on in Subiaco. So it is a real concern to me that we use our resources to their best advantage for all the things that are going on. So those are some of the things I'm taking into account in weighing up. Do we go and try and talk first and document later, which is the entirely normal way to do things? Or do we do some things to try and draw attention to the issues, spend money documenting stuff and present it, which is not conventional at all? I've come down on the side of following the convention, which is to do the talking first. Now, granted, we've been entirely ineffective in doing the talking. Now, that's not because this council and its administration don't believe in what its what has been said tonight and what has been said consistently for a long time. It's because we don't have any power and we seem to have very little, if any, influence. We've also been in a situation where the voice that we rely on has perhaps not been loud enough. So here we sit on the eve of a disaster, trying to find a way to motivate change. I don't feel very hopeful about that, but I do believe it is worth energy and effort because things do change, and in fact, things have changed markedly since even the last attempt at this has happened. COVID has been unfolding. Our state's financial position has been changing. Our appreciation of the value of our lifestyle could not be higher than it is right now in the living memory of this generation and the one immediately before. Obviously, people who lived through the war and things would have some more important things that they had to deal with. But we have had a real shock to our sensibilities. And I think that there are things to talk about in that context. And I think we need somebody who will go and talk about those things for us and our community, who is actually committed to pushing those interests and issues. And one of the things that strikes me is there's a lot going on over in Subiaco East. And why do we have to have this very, very precious land dealt with now? There's a lot of land further east. Let's get that all developed. Let's get that to its full potential, and let's see what it's like to live in Subiaco East with big towers at the edge of West Perth and in the beginning of Subiaco. Let's see what it's like, and let's let those people who don't even live there yet have a say in what happens to the Subiaco Reserve. Leave it there for now, for the future. That doesn't preclude a change of mind in 15 years' time when we're not here. That's what equity would require of us, is to leave it there for now. And I think we can go and have that conversation, and let's do it. So the upshot of all of that is I'll be supporting the first step along the lines of Councillor McMullen's thing. And I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I see those as future possibilities. If we can get some traction, then we will invest the money. In terms of investing money in lobbying, I can see the value in that, because in a way we are weak because we are small. And unless other people in our state stand up with us, what hope do we have against a government that sees us as fairly irrelevant in their power base? But that's an expensive exercise, and you've really got to think that there's somebody that's going to listen to it before you start spending that money. So I would like to do this step by step. I'm grateful to the community for raising the issue and pushing us. Sometimes we need it. And look, we're about to embark on a new era. We've got a new CEO coming in a few weeks who has a great deal of experience and runs on the board in terms of dealing with complex issues and engaging with other parts of government. And I think that's going to be a wonderful opportunity for us. And so I do look forward to us continuing to try to preserve the reserve. So I hope Councillor Phelan will understand that logic. And you know, I don't want to vote down his very you know, a thing that I know he and a lot of the community have put so much effort into. But I think that the sensible way forward is to go with Councillor McMullen's and start the ball rolling.
Thank you, Councillor McMullen.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. On these types of important issues, it's often best to look at the points on which we agree. So that's where I'll start out in explaining why I'm approaching this the way that I am. And look, the simple fact of the matter is that blind Freddie can see that Subiaco needs as much by way of active green playing fields that we can get. We can see it, and look, let's hope that we can convince the state government to see it. But therein lies the missing piece. Scheme amendments and changes to MOUs are interesting ideas, but we achieve nothing if we don't force a shift in thinking in the minds of the state government decision makers who have been calling the shots to date. So that's why, with respect, I don't think now is the time to be launching into a scheme amendment, and nor do I think is it time to be trying to correct a memorandum of understanding, which by its very nature has two parties to it and literally cannot be amended without the state government's buy-in. So look, it's great that this has come to a head, and if you read my supporting reasons that I submitted with my EMM, I actually started by acknowledging the authors, plural, of the elected member motion that Councillor Phelan submitted. That might be a bit unusual, but I think the reality is that a number of people in the community have had their fingers on this issue, and the first EMM that's been submitted tonight. So I'm quite grateful that that Councillor Phelan did proceed to move the motion, and that Councillor Rowe seconded it. It's interesting to see this civil debate that we're having tonight about a pretty important and emotionally charged issue. I think those of us who've actually rocked up tonight would agree that there's been times, lots of times of late, where we haven't been able to have the debate that needs to be had on certain issues that come through these chambers. So it's really good to see that there's possibly two councillors who might be supporting this elected member's motion, but no doubt going to take things in their stride, and I'm sure they won't bag the rest of council on Facebook or anything like that when this motion gets voted down. So it's just really good to hear different points of view and to watch the decision making unfold. So look, whilst I don't support this particular elected member's motion, I'm glad we've had the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McMullen. You're not going to close yet, are you? You've got a question?
Present a possible minor amendment, and I'll be guided by the wording. I'm wondering if I could put something to the effect of...
I think we might have a problem with that because he's already spoken, or just let me see if you can do this. I'm sorry, Councillor Phelan, but you can't put forward the amendment because you have spoken. It had to be done by someone who hasn't. Councillor Rowe, you've spoken. How minor is this? Because I'm happy to give a short recess if you would like to talk to Councillor Powell or Councillor De Vries. No, I don't believe you can do that because you've already spoken. So I'll just ask Council, do you want to take a short recess for this, or would you prefer to proceed? I think we're proceeding. Okay, sorry about that. Councillor Councillor Powell or Councillor De Vries, would you like to speak to the item? Thank you.
Firstly, I'd like to thank... that's okay, no problem.
Well, they've started. I'm sorry.
It's really been a wonderful evening from the point of view of having people come back to the gallery and present to Council tonight. And I do want to thank every single one of you who came to speak tonight. In fact, I think it's the first time that the gallery has been greater than the actual number of councillors here. So that is a first, and thank you again to come here and speak about what are, without any doubt, very, very significant issues for our community. I speak as an educator, and I join that chorus of people who are concerned about the proximity of development to a local high school. I also speak as an educator who worked in inner city Kuala Lumpur next to high-rise developments in a high-rise high school. So I know it can be done, and it is done. It's done with all sorts of protective measures, and I recognise that that is indeed what may be the outcome down the line. So I also want to say there are solutions, and those solutions which appear to be insurmountable will at some point become solutions which become acceptable solutions, as we are no doubt moving to different models of development. Which brings me to the point that I really have to say I do agree with Councillor McMullen. We're dealing with a particular paradigm or a view of the world which was formed some time ago about what would be best for our cities. This is not simply about Subiaco. This is about the future of our city. It's about the future of other Australian cities. We've seen them come up high-rises in Melbourne and Sydney, and we've seen them come down, unfortunately, in the United States recently. So they do go up and they do come down, but they come out of a belief. They come out of a belief of Metronet and transport authorities and what's best for where we should put our people. They come out of belief that urban sprawl is causing too much harm to our community. They come out of a belief that some good will come out of this even if there's some harm. This is the issue. We need to talk to who we can talk to. We need to talk to Premier McGowan. We need to ask him to come and have a dialogue with us. We need to point out, look, some of these presentations tonight were just excellent. And they're just superb arguments for why we should put a hold on this. I agree with Councillor Hammersley. We need a hold. We need to hold back. We need to find a way to just put a pause on this. And that would be what I'd be asking in a letter to the Premier. Can we put a pause on this? Can we just hold off for a while longer and look at how this is going to impact not only on current generations, and I think the historical context that's been put up here is fantastic. Those people in the early 19th century, they came out of industrial England. They had realised the folly of not having open green spaces, active open green spaces. They had seen the benefit of greater physical activity. They came out of the Depression era where, the cheapest form of entertainment was physical activity in open green spaces. There were all sorts of reasons why these policies were put in place, not simply visionary policies, but pragmatic, time-based, practical policies. So I go back to not wanting to say I want to not support Councillor Phelan. I do, in principle, support his concerns, but I have to say I think the approach that is going to work the best for the city of Subiaco at this time will be Councillor McMullen's suggestion in his elected member's motion, that we approach this with a discourse, with a dialogue. I also believe that Premier McGowan is the correct person because, as we know, Rita Saffioti, as the former Minister for Lands, and her role in the Transport Ministry, was also her hat, was to be the architect of Metronet. So I do believe that we can't just walk away and say, oh, you know, Minister Booty is the correct person to go to. He may indeed not be. He's new to the position. Thank goodness, and I'm delighted that he is Minister for Transport. But it is the case that we do need to speak to the correct person. And I do believe that a conversation which brings out some of our really serious and I think increasingly relevant concerns around COVID's, you know, bringing to the front the importance of having our green active open spaces. So I think a conversation's where I would like to go. I also share concerns with Councillor Hammersley about the cost and the impost on the planning department, which I know there's been so much work being done by the planning department, and they have agreed with our recommendations in this respect. Can I just finish? Anyway, so I won't be supporting Councillor Phelan on this particular, on this occasion, although not without a great deal of thought being given to it, and I will be supporting Councillor McMullen. Thank you.
Councillor Powell, would you like to... Okay, thank you, Councillor Rowe.
Well, what I was going to point out was it would have been nice to have heard what the amendment was to give others, like Councillor Powell, the opportunity to work with it, because you don't know what it was. So that's all I was trying to do. Now I think everyone has spoken, perhaps except him and you. Yeah. So he's just read what the proposal is, which might assist in making a decision. Thank you.
I appreciate what you're saying, but as a presiding member, I have to stick to the rules, and the meeting procedures just didn't allow Councillor Phelan to speak to that. So but we have made progress here. Councillor Powell, would you like to speak? Would you like to raise an amendment and so on?
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Look, I would need governance advice on whether I could actually do this, because it refers to the other EMM, which has not yet been before Council. So I don't know whether it's actually practical to do the amendment that's being suggested. Well, if there was a recess, I could possibly discuss it with Councillor Phelan and get governance advice about whether it is practical. However, if that is not granted, then I will just speak to the item.
It's just a matter of...
Okay. Yeah. To be honest, I'm reluctant. Councillor Hammersley.
It has got a bit sticky. Wouldn't there need to be a seconder, and there's none? Oh, you. Yes, I forgot about you. Sorry.
And it actually apparently can be anyone. It's just the first one to. So, Council, we usually do take a recess. Are you in the mood to take a 5-minute break on this? Would you like to? Yep. Mary's head. Do I see enough head nodding? Okay. Thank you, Gallery. We're just trying to get the best result here going forward. So we'll take a 5-minute, or about a 7-minute. We'll come back at 25 to 8. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Powell, are you ready to speak to the item? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Look, I'm going to be moving a procedural motion that the under 7.1a that we move to the next item of business, please. That does mean that this item can come back to the next meeting of council. Look, I agree with many of the points made by the members of the gallery. This is really a situation that is we found ourselves in a very awkward situation, and it's what's the best way to proceed. Sorry. Sorry.
I'll just second that. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay.
Thank you. Say I'll second your 7.1a. If you'd like to now speak to it, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yes. Look, as I was saying, I agree with most of the points made by the members of the community in the gallery. This has been a very vexing subject, and it has been ever since it started. We do find ourselves now in quite an invidious situation, and it's really a question of the best way forward. So I think that the best way at the moment is for us to defer it or have it brought back to the next meeting of council and see how Councillor McMullen's motion fares at tonight's meeting, because that will give us a guide then to how to proceed in the future. Thank you.
Just to clarify, thank you, Councillor Powell, the procedural motion 7.1a reads that the meeting proceed to the next business, full stop. That doesn't actually mean a deferral or that it goes to the next meeting or whatever. Thank you. Also, I'm not too sure if I have to call 4.7, 4.8 because I did enter into seconding a procedural motion, but on the record I'm calling those two meeting procedures 4.7 and 4.8. Okay, we need to put that to the vote. Thank you. I seconded. So thank you, Council. The decision is 6-2. It's carried 6-2. Thank you. We'll now proceed to the next item of business. Now, I'm just thinking why this issue is still hot on Subiaco Oval. Yeah, I'd like to change the order of business. What number is that? Thank you. Okay, I'd like to change the order of business. Hope everybody's happy with that. So we'll move to 11.4 Subiaco Oval with the elected members' motion submitted by Councillor McMullen. Then we will return to 11.3. Thank you. So Councillor McMullen, would you like to move your motion? Thank you. And do we have a seconder for your motion? Thank you, Councillor Hammersley. Councillor McMullen, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Hopefully I'm preaching to the converted now. Look, I'll just talk you through why I think why we're headed in the right direction in making what I see as an incremental, measured, realistic and diplomatic approach to this issue. We're not going in guns blazing just yet trying to get the Premier to take notice of us by throwing money into an expensive lobbying campaign. We're not asking for things that cannot be granted, have no chance of success, or would have no sensible legal effect. We are just asking for a meeting to have a civilised but purposeful and targeted discussion between representatives from our respective levels of government. This, in my view, is how we're going to get the business done, because like I said before, the missing piece at the moment is a change of approach in the minds of the state government decision makers. Now, if the motion's carried, we'll write a letter, as you all know, and we'll put it on the public record. And my thinking is that we'll then let people power carry the letter forward and put some wind into our sails. In this digital age, it doesn't actually take long for issues of importance to gather momentum, and this can be achieved without spending any city money on lobbying at this time. Now, you'll note that the letter would request the Premier's personal involvement, and this is deliberate. We're calling on the Premier to take personal responsibility to salvage this situation because he's rolled up for WA and now it's time for him to roll up for Subiaco. You'll note also that the letter is to be signed by all elected members who wish to endorse its content. This is also deliberate. My hope is that 12 elected members will put their signature at the bottom of this letter, along with the acting CEO. The thinking is that we as a council will be signalling to the state government and the community that there are 12 of us still seated around the table until October who have not given up on this issue. I think that's really significant, and I really do hope that there'll be 12 elected members' signatures at the bottom of this letter. Now, there's steps for a future council meeting detailed right at the end of my elected members' motion, and the first point in particular is important because we're going to select a delegation of councillors who will sit at any meeting with the Premier and the Chair of Development WA, and they will do that alongside staff, of course. Clearly, it's crucial to get the right people at the table, and the only way that council can be satisfied with the representation at any meetings of great importance is to choose who's going to attend. So that's what we'll be doing if the Premier and the Chair of Development WA are good enough to grant us an audience. And of course, there's also going to be an opportunity at a future council meeting to consider any ancillary issues that should be taken to secure the much needed active playing fields in Subiaco East. And it's that point which I think keeps in play any of the issues that we've just been discussing in relation to Councillor Phelan's elected members' motion. So look, I hope there's not too much convincing left to do, but I just wanted to explain the thinking behind this approach and to convey that all issues very much remain in play. And for those in the audience who might be concerned about timing, the reality is that we're getting pretty close to October, and it may be that we're going full steam ahead come October with a mayor, whoever that might be, and a new CEO. It may be that just taking a little bit of time now might pay dividends later on. So look, I'm really comfortable with this approach. You'd expect me to be because I'm moving the elected members' motion, but look, I hope you are too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McMullen. Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. I don't have much more to say, really, than what I said, but I do want to reiterate that thank you to Councillor Phelan for staying true to his course, which is that this has been a matter that he did campaign on and that he has stayed on course. And that's a very difficult thing to do in the face of the enormity of what it involves. And I do admire and respect all of the work that has been done by community members and how hard it is to stand out there saying these things over and over again, these important things, and being met with what's an unfortunate feature of our public life these days, where people raise an issue and it's like ships in the night. The responses that come back do not engage with the issue. And it's very soul-destroying, and it tears at the fabric of our society. And I really think it needs to stop. When someone raises an issue about something important like this, to say to them things like, oh, but yes, we've built a school on your land or on your open space, but you didn't have access to the Subiaco Oval for 20 years, therefore that's the end of the conversation. It's not the end of the conversation, because what these people here, who, let's face it, very few of us are going to be here in 30 or 40 years, what they're doing is pushing something for future generations, for the kids in that school that are going to be going to that school for the next 40 years, for the people who are going to be living in Subiaco in 40 years. So they're doing now what those people did in 1903. And it's very admirable, because it's very difficult to do. So thank you, and let's hope that the passion is taken for what it is, genuine care about people. And if we can get that message across, there is hope. There's always hope that people will look past the easy, quick dollars now for the big picture and the long term. So I'll be supporting this, and I'll be having everything crossed, hoping that we can work over the next 6 months or so, or as long as it takes, to try and get that change of approach, to get some measure, to look to preserve the opportunities, and only to do what is proposed to be done on that Lot 501 as the absolute last measure. There's a lot of other work to do on developing Subiaco before that happens. Let's do all that stuff first, and let's try and have a conversation about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hemsley. Councillor De Vries.
Yeah, I think the essence of my concerns have been expressed really clearly tonight by members of the gallery and other councillors. But what I really want to come to the core of is how best do any parties that have different views of the world come together and maybe align their views and get those people to listen, I think, is through the art of sitting down, negotiating, and possibly finding that place where people can say, okay, yes, now I do understand why these things shouldn't go forward as we planned. And I think, as again, I go back to when there was a vision for Perth that relied on certain transport networks and inner city high-rises to take away the impact on the outer suburbs. And I do work in a fairly distant suburb from Subiaco, and I can testify that there is a bit of urban sprawl going on. But I think the thinking around that was faulty in terms of where all that development should go and who should bear the impost of that. So I think it's going back to that original planning approach and saying, what are the cost benefits? Who's going to lose? Who's going to lose out? Where is the health cost in this? The conversation we have should be about economics of it. As we know, health costs society. And the more people who don't get exercise, the more young people who grow up who don't go out and kick footballs, they grow up to people who don't exercise, they grow up to be people who get hospitalised for diabetes. We know from the studies this is exactly what happens. And I think this is why getting a conversation and making these points, addressing these points, have you thought that this isn't just about the loss of the 1.73 hectares to our community. This is about the cost that it will put on the state. And I do believe that there will be a cost. As I explained, I've lived in China. I've lived in a number of cities in China and experienced what it's like to see people exercising in public squares, doing Tai Chi and dancing. And people are innovative. I can testify to that. I've worked in schools that have, high security lockups because, we've got the Prime Minister's kids there, and I can say people, they deal with it, but it's not something we should have to deal with because we do have a lot of space around us. And if only we could convince the decision makers, and the decision maker is Premier McGowan and his team, if we could get them to the table through a polite process, and I think this is where I agree with Councillor Hammersley's approach, that the other steps that have been suggested are steps for down the track. But I actually want success, and I want success to be foremost in our mind, what will work now? And I think perhaps, I completely think that it's the correct approach to ask and approach that through, a letter and then a conversation. So I think I would put my hand up to be part of the person who wrote the letter. I'll be party to that. I hope all councillors would have an input into the letter that goes to the Premier, and I'd be more than happy to sign that letter to put my voice there. So thank you again, and I commend that motion to fellow elected members. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor De Vries. There's a lot of passion in the room tonight. Thank you for sharing it. Would anybody else like to speak to this item? Thank you, Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. It's not actually to speak, it's actually just to ask if an amendment, a small amendment, would be considered, and it would be dealing with, along with the letters, enclosing a copy of the resolutions themselves, and I don't know quite where we'd slot that in. I don't know whether the mover's willing to.
Senior Planning Manager has a comment to make on that. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Presiding Member, we normally attach the council resolution to the letter in any event, and we did that in the previous letter to the Premier as well. So there doesn't need to be an amendment. We're going to prepare it in that way.
Anything more from you, Councillor Jennings?
Thank you. Just very briefly, I mean, I think I probably put the position before. I hope it was clear, may not have been. But I agree that, this approach of having a dialogue, if we're just presenting, we want a scheme amendment and you must amend the MOU, and it's pretty confronting, and it's also, I suppose, it's repeating the approach that the government has taken, just presenting what is to be without real discussion or consideration of the alternatives. So that's why I think the dialogue thing first is good, and also because, and as I indicated before in the previous debate, there will be costs with doing that work that was proposed in the first motion, Councillor Phelan's motion, and I don't think that money should be spent until we've got an idea of where the government would be willing to go on this. And I think that, just to present those options, it's a bit of, I don't know if you'd call it grandstanding, but it's taking a stand that is kind of confrontational, and I think I prefer this approach, as I indicated before. There was just a couple of things about, I don't know, the MOU. I think it is a legally binding document, and that's the terms of the agreement, signed agreement actually say that, except that there's a few clauses in there that are not binding, and they're accepted in the agreement itself. And what was the other? There was one other thing. Oh, and just going on, and I suppose it's retracking, but the idea of a scheme amendment, it could be done, and even if the WAPC and if the Minister needed to approve it, approved it, it doesn't change the status of what the Development WA can do to the land, because the scheme is completely in abeyance and it is all determined by Development WA and their plans and their zoning. That's my understanding. So, you can scheme amendment away to your heart's content, but unless you bring the government along with, as Councillor McMullen said, to change, a new way of thinking to change their mind, that really won't be effective. Anyway, so that's where I'll leave it. I just do want to say thank you to the community for their work on this. I've been a campaigner in the past, and I know how hard it is, and to keep at it. So, and that's what we need here in Subiaco. Actually, we need a lot more people standing up, because despite the confidence of the people tonight that the council and the city can make a big difference, what we really need is a lot more people power to stand up and say, what they think, if they indeed do think that the planning at Subi East is not good enough, and it's not providing for the future needs of this community in terms of green space, active green space, which it certainly isn't at the moment as planned. So anyway, thank you to all the community members, and it would be great if this, if the Premier and the government would really look at this seriously and, you know, take on board these our ideas and our requests for a better outcome for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Councillor Phelan. I haven't called you to you've already... No, you haven't. I beg your pardon. You haven't. I'm confusing you with your elected member's motion. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll be supporting this motion that seeks to send another letter and request another meeting. And I sincerely hope that this letter and meeting doesn't suffer the same fate that previous letters and meetings have and fallen on deaf ears, including the letter to the Premier that we sent in May 2020. I hope it's successful, and if it were to be successful in preserving the 1.73 hectares of open green space, I would imagine it would probably result in a scheme amendment to rezone Lot 501 Subiaco Oval as parks and recreation, saving it from being carved up as residential and commercial development blocks. If it is not successful, I think we should be bold and try something new like a scheme amendment rather than remaining paralysed trying to predict what the WAPC might do if a scheme amendment reaches their desks. Subiaco Oval is an imminent threat of being carved up, and we need to make a definitive stance as quickly as possible. So I'll be voting for this, and I commend a scheme amendment to you.
No, you commend the motion to us, not the scheme amendment. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Powell, Councillor Rowe, would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, obviously I support it. I wish it all the luck in the world because it's going to need it. I think unless the community has an impact through media and so on, we're not going to get anywhere with this. I think one catch cry that was mentioned earlier by one of the speakers today was that this could be the first time that a Premier has overseen subdivision of a public park that was signed off in, was it 1903 or something? 4, was it? Yeah. And yeah, that's a pretty good catch cry. I wonder if the community really are keen on that idea where a public park gets zapped, especially after the goodwill of our local community and the council at the time to forego Kitchener Park, which is obviously another part of the park. I wanted to talk to the amendment shortly, but yeah, I just wanted to point that out, that I think that is something that the media ought to carry forward for us, because that's a first I don't think the Premier would like to be involved in. Just let me know when you'd like me to talk to the amendment, please.
What amendment are you referring to, Murray? Because you can't. You're speaking now. Well, then you better raise it and not stop. No, you've got to raise, because otherwise you've spoken. You can't raise an amendment. So. Oh, I'm sorry. You're talking about the amendment to the. Yeah, we're going to say things are changing. No. But he had. No, I'm sorry. You still have to. You have to speak to your amendment. You have to keep going. I was waiting for the offer. Thank you very much. That's okay. Well, you're the one that stopped.
Thank you. Okay, now the amendment that I put in came about because I spoke to former Mayor Richard Diggins on Sunday, and so I probably would have liked it to have been a standalone item, but it does sit in with this particular resolution. We need a seconder for your... Okay. Mm-hmm. There's one there.
Can I ask a governance question?
I'm just wondering if Councillor Rowe could raise this as urgent business as a standalone item. I actually thought that's what the government's advice would be when he submitted an amendment to an elected member's motion. Yeah, it would sit quite nicely as its own business.
Through you, presiding member, my understanding is that Councillor Rowe is raising it under 610 of the Meeting Procedures Local Law as a minor amendment to the motion. But if that's not the case, that was my understanding, because that's the only way it can be raised against an elected member's motion.
Raising it as an amendment, could he foreshadow an urgent business motion and raise it as an urgent business motion? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor McMullen. You raised the question about whether this could be entertained as an urgent business motion. Look, it is a standalone item. It could. However, it's not considered to be urgent business. So what that means is it could still be tested as an amendment. It may be successful, it may be unsuccessful. Councillor Rowe, if it's unsuccessful, Councillor Rowe could put it up as an elected member's motion in the August round of meetings. In that way, it's a standalone. Yes, thank you, Councillor Hemsley.
Thank you. I might have an alternate solution that governance might consider for us, and that's under 2.53. So normally when we put up a motion, we have to give notice, and that's 7 clear days. However, 3 says the requirement to give notice of a motion under subclause rule does not apply where the proposed motion is determined by the presiding member to be relevant to a recommendation made by or contained in a report on the agenda or a notice of a motion that appears on the agenda. So I think it's really 3B and is moved after the motion is dealt with. So I wonder if governance could consider whether we could allow Councillor Rowe to have his motion under 2.53B. Thanks.
Through you, presiding member, I would concur with that, but that is at the discretion and determination of the presiding member.
Councillor Rowe, would you like to proceed as an amendment, or would you like to put it up as a motion? Okay. So apologies for the interruption. Would you like to proceed with your amendment then? And do we have a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Phelan, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so this came out of a conversation with former Mayor Richard Diggins on Sunday, so I didn't have much time to go about it as a separate issue. I do believe it's quite urgent. I do believe it's related to the space and the activity, and the other comments that have been made by Councillor McMullen earlier about playing fields, because the other activity that happens in this area is for the use of our kids and adults with them in the courts. So Richard Diggins said to me that the arrangement seemed to be a bit loose. Also, the arrangement at the end of the 5 years seems to be encumbered. And what I mean by that is at the end of 5 years, Development WA are the ones that will make the determination of whether a building gets built on it, whether it gets moved, and the city is ancillary to that decision. So there's nothing different about this. It's a matter of forming an MOU with them, which, as has been said, is a bit more binding, where the city gets a say in the relocation, the existence of it, the continuation of it. I mean, they could move it to another part of the oval without the city's involvement at the end of 5 years. So the two things are just simply, okay, there's shared use. Does anyone around this table know what that shared use is? What, you know, the criteria of it? Is it just after hours, after dark? What is it? So it's just simply to say, you know, the staff say they're already negotiating, well, bring it back to us. Let's have a look at it. And let's shore that up, the same as we did with the use of the oval. You know, the ovals, it's in an understanding, a letter of understanding, that we know we're going to get a certain amount of use of the oval, our children. This is exactly the same thing. So I'm just simply saying, we don't want some wishy-washy agreement. We want a significant agreement about the use of the courts, the shared use of the courts. Point two is, let's put something together that says that the city is involved in any decision at the 5 year mark as to whether it just continues on or gets moved or gets built on that site. So they're the 2 points. They're pretty straightforward. There's nothing fancy about them. We're working on them. The Director of Planning will tell you they're working on them. All this says is put it in writing, bring it back to us, and then let's form it up as an MOU so it's got some credibility later on. Thank you.
Councillor Phelan, would you like to speak to the amendment? Thank you, Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you, it's a question actually, probably for Director Planning or Manager of Planning. So has the Education Department given any indication to date that they would be amenable to entering into the type of agreement that Councillor Rowe's proposing, which is, there's nothing wrong with that in principle, but if we've already had an indication that it's their way or the highway, I'm thinking about staff time going down a route that will not able to be reach the end of because the Education Department just won't come to the party in terms of making an agreement. So if you could just give me some info about that, if you have any.
Thank you, and through you, Presiding Member, the general notion from the school, which has come primarily from the principal, is that after school use, the community can use and book those courts, like the community uses and books the school's gym, the previous court. So whether or not that answers your question on whether the Department of Education would be keen on it, I would say that a more formal agreement would probably you'd probably have to consider costs, for example, and the cost of maintenance, whereas the way it's currently occurring, the community gets to use it. They probably pay a cleaning fee for COVID for whatever it is, so it's quite minimal. So I guess the office comment is we're doing this work in any event and speaking to the Department of Education, understanding what can be done there to unlock community times and hours, and going forward, trying to make the best of the situation. With regard to the 5 years, it's in the development approval that it's a 5-year approval. Nothing in an MOU could fetter the development application process, because whoever's the decision maker then could consider any application, and through the legislation, the City of Subiaco must be consulted. So an MOU there probably would only cover things that are in legislation in any event. So I guess the officer's comment is we probably don't need this motion. It could achieve something in a different way without an MOU. But if we do go down the path that an MOU on agreement is the best option, then we'll in any event present that back to council.
Have you finished? Yep. So question,